Hey everybody, welcome back to Reading and Running. Jake here, and really excited today to share with you my top 10 books that I read in 2023. These were all fantastic books. I read a lot of good books this year. I read a lot of books. In fact, I beat my record this year. As of making this video, I've read 101 books so far. That's more than I've ever read before in a year, so that's really exciting. And there's been a lot of good books this year, a lot of mediocre books as well, but a lot of fun reading this year. Without any further ado, let's jump right into my top 10 reads from 2023. Okay, first up we have Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I talked about this in my first wrap-up video that I made, July 2023, I believe it was. This book really just struck me. I just bowled me right over. This was such a powerful book. It's a short book, as you can see. I recommend this to anyone and everyone. This book is a letter. It takes the form of a letter written by the author to his son, trying to explain what it's like to live in the current state of the world and in America as a Black person, and what and why that burden is. And I mean, it was just wonderful. It was just immense. It just hit all the feelings. I think it's so important to read this as well. And probably one of the best books I've ever read, let alone, top book of 2023. So check this out if you haven't already. Next up, we have How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. I actually read this book twice this year because I enjoyed it so much. This book is a collection of short stories. However, they're all interconnected stories with characters bleeding through from one story to the next. And you really, through this format, get a sense of the world that these stories take place in, and the feelings that its inhabitants are dealing with. It begins the first story with the discovery of a mummy in the Siberian tundra, buried deep in the permafrost, and this unearthing of this mummy releases a age-old virus, and a pandemic begins. The following stories are beautiful examinations of grief, death, artificial intelligence, genetic modification, interstellar travel, tremendous work, a tremendous way of structuring a book, and destined to be one of my favorites of all time, I believe. All right, next up we have Shadows in the Sun Travels Landscapes of Spirit and Desire by one of my favorite authors of all time, Wade Davis. If you don't know anything about Wade Davis, he is an ethnographer and an anthropologist and an ethnobotanist. And he studied a lot in Colombia and in other parts of the world as well. He's a professor, or at least was a professor, at the University of British Columbia. He's very knowledgeable about the American West and particularly the Pacific Northwest. But like I said, he also spent a lot of time in Colombia, around the Amazon basin, and he writes so beautifully about other modalities of thought, other realities that different people around the world live in. I love his writing as much as I do any good fantasy book. The eloquence of how he describes his travels and the people that he meets and their personal mythologies, their religions, why they do the things they do, while infusing his stories and his essays with the wonder of the natural world. He knows so much about plants and their histories, and he's fluent in Spanish, and he's able to talk to all these people that he meets in his travels and really get to know them. This book is a essay collection, and he takes you all around the world. We go from Colombia to Borneo to Haiti to the Pacific Northwest, and I read this all the way back in January, and I just keep thinking about it. I think I'm going to reread it, maybe in the next month or next couple months, because I'm just kind of missing it. I'm missing how I felt, and so luckily I've got this one in physical form. I can go back to it whenever I want. Wade Davis is a author that I own everything that I want to. He's someone that I make space for on my bookshelf. So if any of that sounded exciting to you, I would so highly recommend Wade Davis. And next up, we have The Children of Hurin by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is a work that was edited by his son, Christopher Tolkien, and published sometime in the 2010s, I believe. This story follows a earlier age than the events that Lord of the Rings take place in. It's in the form a little bit of a tragedy, I would say. I just really enjoyed this. It's been a long time since I read The Lord of the Rings, but I jumped in this year to The Fall of Gondolin and The Children of Hurin, and they really just hit a sweet spot for me. I mean, I love his writing, and these were new, these were novel to me. They weren't Lord of the Rings, which I've read multiple times, so it wasn't, I mean, those are good, but this was just, it expanded the lore, and it expanded upon the characters and the relationships, the lineages, and it really stuck with me throughout the year. It's a beautiful story about someone who is just always chasing the next foe and what that does to you, your soul, and those around you. Beautiful book. Of course, recommend to anybody who likes Lord of the Rings or just fantasy in general. This has a place on any fantasy lover's bookshelf. Next up, we have Child of God by Cormac McCarthy. This is one of the tougher books I've ever read in terms of subject matter. Don't go into this book lightly. It's dark, it's heavy. It made me feel feelings that I've never encountered. Well, I've encountered them before in reading, but I've never felt so strongly that I empathized with a character who was so evil. And I think that's the power of Cormac McCarthy in his writing. He's able to really get down to the essence of humans and of certain characters and portray them in a way so real and so raw. Of course, you'll know if you've watched my other videos, I'm a huge Cormac McCarthy fan. I love his writing style. I love the imagery that he uses, and I would read this book again, but it's dark. If you've read Blood Meridian, this is right up there with the dark places he'll take you. But if you've read Cormac McCarthy, you also know within that darkness is such powerful writing and his attempt at answering such fundamental human questions. I recommend this, but it's like with a big caveat, this is dark. Not everyone will like this, but I love it. The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories by Ken Liu is another short story collection featuring the title story, The Paper Menagerie and Others. One of these stories was adapted into a film in, I believe, the first season of Love, Death, Robots on Netflix. A great animated series if you haven't checked that out. Also a big recommendation for that show. This short story collection dealt with some pretty hard sci-fi and also historical fiction, some kind of more contemporary fiction. He's got it all in there. Ken Liu's a wonderful writer. He writes really beautifully about the experience of someone immigrating from their homeland to somewhere else. A lot of his stories revolve around that theme. He takes it into the universe. Some of his stories are, like I said, hard sci-fi. It's advanced intelligences that go beyond the confines of a biological host. He takes you all over. I don't know exactly how to describe this collection as a whole. However, each story was really strong. This was an absolute 5-star for me. Each story in this book was such a strong entry. Anyone that appreciates speculative fiction, science fiction, even a little bit of literary fiction, you would just totally love this book. And of course, if you've read other things by Ken Liu, the Dandelion Dynasty, for example, you'll know what a strong writer he is. Okay, next up we have Asada. This autobiography follows Asada Shakur's time mainly in various prisons and in various courtrooms as she's being tried for absolutely outrageous offenses that she was not part of. I'm getting ahead of myself, but this is in my eyes, a very, very important story that, for me, contextualized a lot of other works that I had read previously, such as The New Jim Crow, Caste by Isabella Wilkerson, even Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This was an early account of a very powerful activist, part of the Black Panther Party, who was being absolutely shut down at every turn by the FBI, powers that will, the white majority. Her story was amazing. She flipped back and forth between her upbringing and then kind of the current events of the time, where she was being tried for a robbery, which she was not a part of, obviously, and a murder, which she had nothing to do with, and It recounts some of her time in prison. And then, of course, it ends, and she doesn't tell us one of the most extraordinary parts of her life, which is her escape from a federal prison and subsequent, fleeing of the country to go live in Cuba. Um, Incredible woman, an incredible story, an incredible figure in history, a absolute cornerstone to um, the Black experience in the 70s and 80s, and um, I learned so much. This, like I said, just put a lot of things in perspective. This contextualized a lot of the history of other recent works that I've read, such as How to Be an Anti-Racist, for example, by Kendi, and other books that I've previously mentioned. Big time recommendation with this one. Big shout out to my book group. We read this together, had some great discussions. I had no idea about this person or this book, and you can find it online. It's worth picking up and reading. I highly recommend it. The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. One of my absolute favorite all-time authors. Le Guin, I would probably credit Le Guin with my awakening to reading. I read The Left Hand of Darkness in my first year of college, and that book absolutely blew my mind. It changed everything for me. And this is no less a masterpiece. The Dispossessed is about what some people call an ambiguous utopia. The story focuses on a character living on a moon that is part of a anarchy society of people who are trying to live as free as possible. They are not obligated to work. They are not they're not beholden to money. There's no capitalism in their society. There's no hierarchy of government. The way that Le Guin, can fit so much into a book. Her economy of writing is outstanding. In one page, so much can happen. This story really makes you think about her as a writer. First of all, she was writing these groundbreaking things in the 60s and 70s that were just so ahead of her time. These ideas of anti-government and anti-capitalism and intellectualism and what it would mean to live in a world like that. It just blows my mind. Secondly, the story follows a character, an intellectual, an academic who is reaching to communicate with others. And the planet that the moon orbits is kind of, it's the original habitation. People that live on the moon used to live there, and they fled 7 or 8 generations before the events of this book. But we follow this physicist as he tries to communicate with others and get his ideas acknowledged, and really, what does that mean? He travels away from home to try and find a piece of himself that he's missing. I don't want to go too much further. In case of spoilers, I'd just say, if you like science fiction, if you like literary fiction, If you like Le Guin and you haven't read this yet, bump this up to the top of your list. This is incredible stuff. And look at this beautiful paperback edition. That's a great cover. Anyway, It Is Possessed. One of my favorite reads of all time. All right. Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese. Big, chunky family saga, historical fiction. We're following many generations of a family in India in the 20th century, post-colonial England rule. I won't give away too many things because I believe this book is best gone into blind, and stick with it too, because at the beginning it comes at you pretty quickly. You might not be sure what all is going on, but stick with it. You will be rewarded. This is a beautiful, beautiful book. People of this family, oddly, have really, really bad luck regarding water. Drowning in little standing water. They become terrified. It becomes known as perhaps a curse upon the family. But what's really going on? Multiple POVs in this. Amazing character who's a Scottish surgeon who comes to the area and works to help out the population dealing with leprosy. Just gorgeous writing, gorgeous characters, so much love and fear, but also bravery in this book. Couldn't recommend it more. I mean, you just, even after 800 pages, you don't want it to end. Brilliant, brilliant stuff. Check out the audiobook. It's narrated by Abraham Verghese. He is one of the best narrators I've ever heard. Tremendous, tremendous book. All right, the last book of the list. When We Cease to Understand the World by Benjamin Labatut. Probably not saying that right. This came out 2 years ago, I think. I just picked it up this year, and I read it twice. It was amazing. I need to read it again. It's one of those books that's so just profound, so deep in its themes. Where to start with this one? So this is a series of case studies, shall we say, of different intellectuals throughout history who pushed the boundaries of science and thinking. And this is an examination of what happened to their minds, essentially. It also poses the question, is it worth progressing scientific knowledge if the same advances that are used for good are also used for evil? In the first story, for example, we follow a lot of the early inventions of dyes and chemicals in Europe. And while they were great inventions for the textiles industry, they were also major ingredients in mustard gas and bombs. And this just, you'll have to read it for yourself. It's challenging, it's intellectual, it's physics heavy and math heavy, and it'll throw you for a loop. You tell me, non-fiction or non-fiction, what do you think? I can't recommend this more. Of all the books I mean, I read so many good ones this year. And by the way, this being number 10 does not mean it's my least favorite of the 10. I'm almost at a loss for words. This is tremendous. If you like science, you should read this. If you like history, you should definitely read this. If you like physics, you should definitely read this. If you want to think about what it means to live in this world and contribute to any realm of thought, you should read this. Absolutely powerful, powerful book. All right, everyone. So that was my 10 favorite books that I read in 2023. If you read any of these, please do drop me a comment. Tell me what you think. Did you like these books? Did you read them this year? Have you read them previously? Tell me your favorite books that you read this year, or just some of your favorites in general. I would love to hear from you. Before I go, however, I do have to mention a few honorable mentions. I read too many good books this year to leave it at 10, so I'm going to throw in a couple others here just at the end as a couple honorable mentions. First, we have The Cry of the Kalahari by Mark and Delia Owens. You might be familiar with Delia Owens. She, of course, wrote Where the Crawdads Sing. Oh gosh, I think I'm getting the title wrong. Anyway, that was adapted into a film recently. That was a big hit. Of course, she wrote this with her husband at the time, Mark, decades ago. This was their first work that they wrote together, and it recounts their experience traveling to Southern Africa, Botswana in particular, and studying lions, hyenas, jackals, various birds, panthers, and their exploits and their adventures are just so much fun to read about. They were wild and reckless young people with just an absolute passion for animals and science. Some of the stuff in this is quite unbelievable. Literally, it's a beautiful book. Anyone that loves nature, wildlife, nonfiction, adventure, this is for you. This is great. The next honorable mention is Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. His Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, All the Light We Cannot See, has just been adapted on Netflix. I'm not sure I want to watch it because I like the book so much. Anyway, this came out at the end of 2021. I read it when it was brand new. Absolutely loved it. 5-star read. And then we read it last month for one of my book groups, and I loved it just as much. Anthony Doerr's writing it's different. It's got such a strong tone to it, but it's so beautiful. And I will always be on the lookout for what he's writing. And this in particular is a beautiful story that's an ode to the story. It's an ode to the book. It's an ode to libraries, book lovers, story lovers. I've heard some criticisms of this book, people saying it's about nothing. I think they're missing the point. I think that Anthony Doerr really nailed it with this. This book can be a little bit tricky to get into because it follows multiple perspectives, and they range from the future, people on a generation ship heading off into the universe, and then we have a 15th century pair of characters that are in the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, during a really rough time in history, a lot of war and strife. And then there's characters from the mid-20th century, early 21st century. It bounces between perspectives, but there's a strong through line. And I just thought this was beautiful. It's going to be on my shelf forever. I'll keep rereading it throughout my life. It's so comfortable of a read, and I just love that it's an ode to the story, an ode to the bedtime story, but done in such a clever way. Check it out. Another honorable mention, Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. This book follows a young man in the Appalachian Mountains, growing up with a very disjointed family. He ends up in foster care. It's an ode to David Copperfield by Dickens, of course, but it's not the same, and it's beautiful in its way that it captures the effects of the opioid crisis. It's really at the heart of the book is what these peoples of this region have gone through as the opioid crisis has ravaged that part of the U.S. Barbara Kingsolver is a fantastic writer. She said that she attempted to write the great Appalachian novel with this book. I don't know if she did or not. I'm not widely read enough to say one way or the other, but I can say that I loved this book so much, and I think you would too. Okay, quickly, one last honorable mention. The Gentleman Bastard series by Scott Lynch. I listened to Red Seas Under Red Skies and The Republic of Thieves this year. So books 2 and 3 of the series. Of course, we're still waiting on book 4, which Scott Lynch, I think, has been working on for quite some time. I particularly liked Red Seas Under Red Skies. The Republic of Thieves was still really good, but I thought Red Seas Under Red Skies was a bit better. I just loved how ridiculous it was. The positions that Locke and John are thrown into. I mean, if you're a fan of the series or if you've read The Lives of Locke Lamora, you will know the antics that these characters get up to. Hilarious writing. The use of profanity is just absurd and hilarious, and the world as well. It's actually quite a beautiful fantasy world, and so much curiosity that I have, particularly surrounding the creation of some of the older elements, the elder glass, and the religious elements, things of that nature. Anyway, great fantasy, just good fun. All right, everyone. So that does it. That wraps up my top reads of 2023. And like I said, please drop a comment down below. Let me know what you read this year, what your favorite read was. And I'll see you again in another video soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.